Let me know when you're ready.
It's recording.
All right. So my name is Thomas Hayat, and this is for History 101. Why is history important? Because it repeats itself. And why do we need to keep that knowledge? Well, simply because it takes money and time to do the very same research several times. So let's start with the father of all things, as far as I know, and that would be Aristotle. Aristotle used to be of the thought that rhetorics had to be taught alongside mathematics, alongside geography, alongside philosophy, and alongside psychology. All that he used to do in Greece when it was open speech, where one person himself or somebody else would be talking here and interacting with everybody, bouncing off ideas back and forth. It was all rhetorics was taught along mathematics also, and all had to do with communication. After him came Plato, who started dividing things, and that's when we started seeing the large division between Stoicism, which is what really is, just like astrologers used to look at things and the gods as things that were just there and could not really be argued with, and the skeptics, who constantly thought that through more rhetorics and more thinking and more philosophy, then we can have more free will. Which over time, the free will took over what really was, what existed, and now we're just at the point where in 2018, everything has to be argued. That's why in this country there's so many lawyers. At any rate, we're getting sidetracked. So here's why history is so important. In 2016, before Christ, Archimedes, already at his time, who was kind of a Leonardo da Vinci of his time, had told the military to shine their shields to the point where they could reflect the sun on it, and it's even talked about in the Bible where the Roman fleet just caught on fire because they just used all the mirrors that they shine real well to convect onto one single point, and that's how they caught each of the Roman Navy fleet on fire. In the Bible, it's quoted as they lit up or something like that. That solar reflector system, Archimedes was a genius in so many ways. I mean, he's the one that actually came up with the principle of Archimedes, which is when you plunge a solid into a liquid, you displace the very same amount of volume that this solid is going to be. He had a very good understanding of the elements, whether it be water or fire, which was lit by the sun, or even the earth itself and how things really worked. Pause it for a second. Okay, so why does it matter so much? And here's why. Archimedes' concept of using solar reflection to harness the energy and be focused onto just one point did not get found again up until Augustin Mouchot, who was a French inventor and won the gold medal at the Paris exposition, which is the very same one that Gustave Eiffel exposed the Eiffel Tower in 1903. Augustin Mouchot presented his idea of a solar reflector that looked like a parabola and just had a central point where all the sun energy would be focused, and that superheated coil would send the heat energy into a water coil, and from that in a water tank, and that water tank would create the steam for the engine that he had. On that particular date, 1878, he had actually used the sun heat to get a refrigerator to make ice cream, which is pretty brilliant when you think about it. But Augustin Mouchot died very early in 1912 or 1913. An American by the name of Frank Schumann, right before World War I, in 1913, was in the Sahara Desert and had already started a huge solar power plant where he had claimed that he could supply an entire city. The problem is, as soon as World War I started, tanks and airplanes came about, and also other land vehicles. those run on gasoline. So that's when we switch from solar to gasoline, which we haven't left in over 100 years so far. After Frank Schumann's idea and Mouchot's idea got pushed under and forgotten by history, it wasn't until 2011 that we found Solana, an American company, which opened its first solar reflecting power plant in Arizona. Now understand that the solar reflection is not the same as voltaic panels. Voltaic panel requires silicon, which is detrimental to the earth when the panel is done for after 20 years. Solar reflectors are simply mirrors, just like in Archimedes' time, mirrors that reflect the sun and are angled to converge at only one very point. And that very point becomes, in modern day, a tower that is filled with potassium and sodium, which becomes liquid at 500 degrees. And when it becomes liquid, it goes being stored into a tank. But instead of being 500 degrees, that energy in there is actually 7,000 degrees. And this 7,000 degrees go into a tank that contains water, and you can keep that heat for up to 40 days. So unlike conventional voltaic panels, if it's gray, you're not collecting any electricity. This will keep the heat for up to 40 days. There's very few places on Earth where the sun doesn't shine for 40 days in a row. So this, which we have today, is why history is so important. If we keep every time we have something that works, that comes back from, about 2,000 years, 2,200 years, if we always push stuff and dismiss it due to rhetoric, which is what lawyers really love, that rhetoric, which originally was used by Aristotle, but with temperance, meaning we can discuss it, but do not forget the environment itself for what it is. Now that we have rhetoric, we forgot the environment completely. The whole of our observation is made in a virtual world, whether it be a computer or a phone, and that rhetoric of lawyers got us to this very thing, copyrights. Copyrights is basically the hoarding of knowledge for just the sake of the greed of one individual or one company. Now here's the thing, as much as we have copyrights, which the Russian didn't have, or the Chinese don't really care about our copyrights, Brazil does not even care about our copyrights, Morocco does not care about our copyrights. So that means that for them, they can take any 2 bits of information, put it together in a movie, and spread the knowledge back the way it's supposed to be. Whereas us, because we have so many rules, we can't do that. In fact, there's a guy who had made wonderful videos called Astrom on YouTube. It got taken down because some of the footage was from NASA and was considered a violation of copyright. I'd like to know, how is it that NASA, which is a federal institution that's funded by us, the people with our taxes, can privatize knowledge about the solar system? Does NASA own the solar system? No. So we're just going to keep shooting ourselves in the feet. And how do I know that? Because as a Frenchman, which I am, in China, the word France no longer exists. It doesn't actually exist at all. The correct translation for what they call us as France is the country of the laws. Because we have so many laws that we can't even produce a single thing in France. Everything has to go through administrative. We have so many middlemen, and that's what is happening here in the US. The US boomed during the 1900s because there was there wasn't that many rules. So corporations could pretty much do as they pleased. Well, that went to an extreme where in 1929, they had the big crash at Wall Street, but it was just because of greed. The Taylorization itself, which was the concept of industrialization, but station by station, is something that Hold on, I gotta regather my thought. Pause for a second. How far? Okay, so now with gathered thoughts, the key word of Aristotle was temperance. And temperance is really a concept that is closer to equality and equilibrium. Now, whether you're a planet, whether you're a human being or a tree or a stone, we're all subjected to pressure and time. The more pressure you put on something, either you're going to have to give it time to grow, or you're going to have to use miracle grow so that you can shorten the time. But that's going to put a lot of pressure and stress on the plant itself, so it might not live as long. The point of that is, if you put too much pressure and not give time to understand things, your communication is getting slowly down to zero, and it just becomes an imposition of self. And that self is one standard model that fits all, and all businesses are being built the same, with one dude that has an idea that's at the top that decides for everybody else. Case in point, Elon Musk from SpaceX, who is also the owner of Tesla. When he came into to his company, the first thing that he did was cut out all the acronyms that were used for SpaceX and all that, just so that he alone could have the control of what is communicated, what is not communicated. So it was a huge trimming. Elon Musk was a cancer, by the way, and so was Tesla. And Tesla's concept of energy was that it was free, it was in the air, and we could use it. He got shut down by Franklin. Franklin was a Capricorn. How does that still relate to history? Let's get back to another great inventor, Leonardo da Vinci, who was an Aries. Da Vinci himself had a very good grasp of philosophy, psychology, a great sense of observation. That's why he became the #1 in his days. But all of his genius was also tapped into by the military, asking him to create machines to basically defeat the enemy. Now, sometimes he missed, sometimes he got it right. But Archimedes was a little bit better than him in that sense. The point is, if we always use knowledge just because we're submitted to just an imposition of a leader that is just basically giving us the modern idea of American politics, whether it's foreign or domestic, which is submit or face complete destruction. If you remember in the days of Bush, who also was a cancer, Bush Jr., that's exactly what he told the world. He told the world, you're with us or you're against us, against the axis of evil. Well, how can we function still in the primate format of submit or face complete destruction? Ultimately, this form of living is like a scale, and it gets tilted. We can't keep this rhythm as it is. So we need to get back to the rhetorics where we actually exchange. It's not just somebody that imposes on everybody else what they think, but somebody that just has an idea, brings it forth as an hypothesis, and then eventually other people can answer back and say, yes, it might work with this, but it might not work with that. And that's where we get equality and equilibrium, from which once you're at an equilibrium point, you can decide whether you want to go right or whether you want to go left. But if you're already to the right, there's no way to do that. So temperance, even after, 3,000 or 4,000 years after Aristotle, is still on the table. Temperance, which means nothing else but everything in moderation. Something that we know nothing of in this country. We're the ones that are going from one extreme to the other constantly, and then calling the rest of the world extremists. So, just like it says in the Bible, don't look at the particle of dust in somebody else's eye, but rather look at the huge beam you have in yours, and that's obstructing your vision. Once we learn how to remove ego, which is self, out of the equation so that we can actually see the rest of everybody, then we start having something. And that's why history is so precious, because it teaches us that everything is cyclical. What we're doing, there's nothing new about it. What is it? I had it here earlier. Solana, or even the Kingdom of Morocco did with those huge, the largest solar reflector in the world and all that. They're trying to make it sound as though it's brand new. It's not. It was already there in 216 before Christ. Solana came about in 2011. In 2008, I was already working on something like that, but not with an idea of making money for myself, but just to bring. In fact, I should make a separate video for that, because that's going to get technical. Okay, so in 2008, while I was in Idaho, I was already pondering about that. I didn't know about Hst.101. I didn't know that it all existed before in the days of Archimedes. And so my idea was, in order to make people independent, what they really need most is energy, independence of energy. And how do we do that without spending $1 million every time or having to buy very expensive equipment to get started on anything? Well, we can do it with trash. This, imagine, is a 50-gallon water heater. If you cut it in half, you get 2 halves of a circle. Now, if you use the mechanism that's in a car window, you have a 12-volt motor where the window is, underneath where you take the cover off. And underneath you got that 12-volt motor and this triangular piece that actually, when this spins, makes the triangle go this way to make the window go up, or make the triangle go the other way to make the window go down. Imagine you take that from a junkyard, and then you take the water heater from another junkyard that you have cut in half, and now you mount this mechanism on one side and then another on the other side. Well, you can follow the sun from sunrise to noon in this position to sunset. And inside of this, you use the same concept of Archimedes on the ships, where you get all the sunlight to converge onto one single pipe of copper containing oil in it. Oil has a much higher boiling point than water, so it can take a lot more heat. Now you get this oil to go into a coil, same way here, and that coil is full of water. As the water turns into steam instantly, that steam engages your steam engine. Now you have electricity, and it's reliable because you can keep that steam under 4 feet of dirt even in the winter time, and still have access to that steam to turn it into electricity. Now we will all be independent, and instead of having huge solar power plants that actually create and disturb the magnetic field, and that's what makes affects the migration of migratory birds and so on. We can just have smaller version of that where we each independent, but we're not disturbing the entire field by having 100,000 megawatts worth of magnetic electricity produced in one spot. We need to stop being so selfish, and we need to observe more outside of self. And until we do that, we're doomed to failure. We're headed straight for disaster, just like the fall of the Greek Empire, the fall of the Babylonian Empire, the fall of even the French Empire, the British Empire, and all that. When you turn to too much greed, that you keep telling your people, no, okay, just keep working at it, just keep working at it, and you have a toilet that's made out of gold, while everybody else doesn't even have a pot to piss in, that's when you get revolutions, and that's when everything falls apart. That's why history is so important throughout not just the centuries, but the millennia. And I think I'll cut here.